Hey, good afternoon, all. It's time for the rewind this Monday. Before we get into it, though, I want to give you a heads up. March 21st, we're going to have a spring cleanup day at church. Get everything looking good and spruced up for the Easter visitors that we'll have coming up in 2 weeks after that. So just put it on your calendar. We'll give you more details as we go. Should be around like 8 to 12, 8 to 1 o'clock in the morning, and we'll get some things accomplished. We got some cool things we want to do. Well, last week we talked a little bit about not glossing over Scripture, but spending some time and trying to understand who people are, what their story is, where they come from. And we talked a little bit about Barnabas. But today we're going to talk more about a guy that was we just touched on last week called John Mark. We find John Mark pop up in Acts chapter 12. The story begins that Peter has been preaching the gospel and Herod throws him in jail for the night, going to bring him to trial in the morning. Well, that night in jail, an angel shows up and frees Peter from jail and leads him out. Well, when Peter gets outside, he's a little bit confused and dazed as to where he is and doesn't know what's going on. And we find Acts chapter 12, verse 12. When this had dawned on him, meaning where he was, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. So we just stop in this passage and let's see, what can we ascertain about who John Mark is? Well, I'm going to give you a really easy one first, all right? What's his mom's name? All right, you got that one. It is Mary. Now, it says many people are gathered in the house to pray. So what does that tell you about the size of their house in those days? Most houses weren't very big, but if you're going to get many people in there to pray, probably a little bit bigger than normal. That means they probably have a little bit of money, maybe some means, but it also tells me they're a very faithful house. They're praying, and that's where Peter knows where to go when he gets out of jail, and so he goes there. So this also gives us some insight that this might be a meeting place or a meetup between Peter and John Mark, maybe for some ministry later on. I don't know. We'll have to find out. Acts chapter 12, verse 25 then, and what says, when Barnabas and Saul had finished their mission, they returned from Jerusalem, taking with them John, also called Mark. So Barnabas and Saul, now we're talking about, remember Paul in the coming chapter in chapter 13, they grab just John Mark and take him with them because they're going to take him on a missionary trip. So they pick him up in Jerusalem and they're going to take him to the church in Antioch as they go. So this says something maybe a little bit special about John Mark, that these two great missionaries, these two great evangelists want to bring him along. And it says that he accompanies them to Salamis on the island of Cyprus as a helper. Acts chapter 13, verse 5. Now, I still want to get a little bit of a sense there. We knew that he had met Peter, but what's the relationship between Barnabas and Saul and this John Mark? Well, you got to read ahead a little bit, do some digging again, go to Colossians chapter 4, verse 10. Here Paul writes from prison again, my fellow prisoner Aristarchus sends you his greetings, as does Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. So we see the familiar ties there. We know his mom. Mom must be related to Barnabas' folks in some way, but we see that they are their family. Well, Barnabas and Saul take John Mark on this mission trip, but somewhere along the way early on, he ditches them and deserts him, Paul will say later, and heads back home. And that causes just a little bit of rift, because later on we're going to see that they want to go on another mission trip, and Barnabas wants to take John Mark, but Paul says, no way, I don't want that dude with me. So Barnabas is going to pick up John Mark, because remember, Barnabas' name means encourager. That's what the apostles called him. And so I can see Barnabas wanting to take John Mark and encourage him. So he says, hey, look, let's go on another missionary trip. I'm going to give you a second chance. Let me ask you this. How many times have you had second chances or third chances or maybe even fourth or fifth chances in some cases? God gives us all kinds of chances, but isn't it funny how we are often reluctant to give people a second or third chance in our lives? So be an encourager like Barnabas. Again, Acts chapter 15, verse 37, they're going to go on a missionary trip. Barnabas wants John Mark. Paul says no, so they end up splitting up. Verse 39 says they had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus. Paul... Excuse me. Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. In the midst of all their missionary journeys, then, Barnabas and John Mark, some wonderful things must have taken place. he must have really grown in the Lord. He must have proven himself in the mission field. Because a little bit later on, Peter's going to write about the work that he's doing with Mark. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13. She who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you her greetings. So does my son Mark. Two things here, the she in Babylon. You're probably going, well, who is the she in Babylon? Well, remember that the church is the bride of Christ. So most likely they're saying the church, all right, the church in Babylon sends you their greetings. Now, Babylon is a code word for Rome in those days. Rome was very much like Babylon. A lot of idolatry, a lot of power grabbing, a lot of corruption and sin. And so this is what they called Rome. Peter has taken John Mark under his wing and worked with him, grown him, mentored him. So despite his early failure on that first mission trip, we see that Barnabas takes him and he does a lot of great things. Then we see that Peter takes him under his wings and helps him to grow even more. But somewhere along the way too, then he also earned back the trust of Paul. You know, when you fail, sometimes we feel like we can never get back to that place where we were. Well, remember, God is the God of second, third, and fourth chances. And if you persevere and keep going, you can get back the trust. You can get back your integrity if you'll continue to work at it. So John Mark must have never given up hope. And in fact, we finally see in 2 Timothy chapter 4 that Paul actually asked for John to be sent to him. He says, send John Mark to me because he is helpful to me in my ministry. Well, according to Papias of Hierapolis, a bishop in Hierapolis who lived between 60 and 130 AD, Peter worked very closely with John Mark. In fact, John Mark most likely wrote the Gospel of Peter, and so he got most of his information from Peter during this time. Papias says that because he is a very well-known author in those days, and one of his best books was called Expositions of the Sayings of the Lord. 5 volumes about all the teachings of Jesus Christ and the origins of the gospel. You know what? Maybe sometimes you feel like John Mark, like you failed. Find a Barnabas, find a Peter. All of us men should be looking for people that we can mentor just like that. So never give up hope. Continue to persevere. God's got a plan for you, and he wants to use you. Hey, have a great week. Hopefully we'll see you Wednesday night.